I'm Sean Bowes, concert visual designer in Los Angeles, California. For the past year, concerts haven't really been a thing, so I've been focused on XR. Yesterday, Disguise released their R18 public release, which puts XR in the hands of everyone. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to quickly get a scene set up with Unreal Engine, the Disguise RenderStream Plugin, and R18. First, we need to download a few things. Head on over to Disguise.1 and go to the Download Center, where you can download R18. Down in the Resources tab, under RenderStream, you can find the plugin that works for you. We're going to use the Unreal 426 plugin compatible with R18. Under this tab, you can also find some R18 resources, which have a demo XR project for D3 and a demo Unreal and Notch project as well. If you don't have a Disguise license, in the Store tab, you can get their designer software for free until June 2021. They'll send you a little dongle, and you'll be able to use the Disguise software for testing. Please note, Designer does not give you output. To playback, you will need Disguise hardware. But this is good for setting up a show and doing some testing as a designer. Hey! Of course, you will also need Unreal Engine, and we're going to be using 426. Alright, so once you've downloaded and installed Disguise, it's going to create this RenderStream projects folder for you, probably on your in your documents folder. So what you're going to want to do is bring in the project that you want to use in XR into that folder. So I've already done that here. I have a little test project that I'm going to use for the demo. And the first thing that you're going to need to do is install the plugin. So I have the plugin over here in my downloads folder. I've unzipped it. And in our projects folder, we just need to create a new folder. Call that plugins. And then in there, drop this Disguise UE Renderstream folder, that whole thing in there. Not the one with the version name on the end or anything, just this. And click in there and make sure that what's inside there is, you know, the binaries, the content, stuff like that. Sometimes there's like a double unzip thing going on. So yeah, bring this in there. We'll copy it into the plugins folder. And now you've got the plugin in the project. So we can open up the project and we'll start setting up RenderStream. Okay, so I've got the project open. We're just going to check our plugins. And you can see Disguise RenderStream is installed and enabled. Great. So RenderStream now uses a couple of component objects on cameras and actors in the scene to define channels and which objects are visible in each channel. This allows us to separate objects into, say, a backplate and a frontplate channel, for example. So to do this, we need to create a couple of cameras. I like to use the Cine camera, because then you can more closely match it to your actual camera. And I like to just pull that down to 0 just so there's no like artificial limits. And we're just going to name this. This name is going to be the name of the channel that pops up in Disguise. So I'm going to call that backplate. I'm going to copy it and just rename this one front plate. And like I said, RenderStream uses components to do all this. So we're going to go to component. We're just going to type in RenderStream, and there's two components. There's a channel definition and a channel visibility. You're going to add channel definition to each of these cameras to define them as channels, and then you're going to use the channel visibility on objects and actors in the scene in order to make them visible or invisible to each of these channels. Alright, so let's add a channel definition to our backplate, and we can leave the default visibility as visible. There's some show flags and things in here also if you want to get a little more specific, but for backplate this is pretty good. What this means is that everything by default is visible in the backplate. Most of your objects are going to be in the backplate. The only real need to put something in front plate is if it's going to cross in front of your talent, between the talent and the camera, like my hand is doing. Anything out on the side or behind the talent can be rendered in the LED in the backplate. Alright, so let's go ahead and do the same thing for the front plate. RenderStream channel definition. For this one, we're going to set the default to hidden. This means that by default, nothing is in the front plate, and we're just going to selectively add objects to the front plate using the channel visibility tag. Awesome. So now we have our two channels set up. Super easy. Let's take a look at the scene and kind of decide if anything needs to be in the front plate. Obviously, I set up this scene, so there's some obvious things. How about these piles of boxes? These would be a good idea to be in front plate because as we're sort of floating around our camera here, we can see that they sometimes might cross in front of our talent. Awesome. So I actually have these separated out already. And we can go ahead and add a component, RenderStream channel visibility. And what we're going to do is we're going to force visible in the front plate, and we're going to force hidden in the back plate. So they're not visible in both. Sometimes this can cause issues if you have something rendering in the LED and also in the front plate. If tracking is not perfect, you're going to get doubling. So we'll just hide it in the back plate and make it visible in the front plate. And you just want to repeat this step for every object that should be in the front plate. This is a little tedious to do, so there are other ways to do it. You could do this through blueprints and things like that, but for a basic setup, this will get us going. And one final thing we need to do is in the project settings. If we go down to plugins, to the Disguise RenderStream section, there's this one setting here, scene selection. And this is going to choose between one of three modes of how we're going to choose which scene to play in Disguise with RenderStream. So none means that you will manually load a level using Unreal workflow options. This might render this might load up the default map, but if you want to switch levels, you need to do that within Unreal, controlled by Unreal. streaming levels. This way, if you had a bunch of different sub-levels loaded up, let's look in our levels tab. Alright. Yeah, so if you had a bunch of different sub-levels loaded up here, streaming levels would almost act as like a playlist. And it would send a load level command to load up one at a time of the sub-levels that you have loaded into sort of your master persistent level. And then the third option here is maps. That's the one I'm going to use right now. This is going to allow you to load a map from your project. It doesn't have to be loaded as a sub-level. It's just any level that is inside of your scene, and also that has been opened and changed and saved since installing the plugin. This can get a little confusing and a little messy, but that's sort of the rules that this applies by. So maps, and we'll save all of that. And now we can close Unreal. And what that does is it creates this JSON file here, which you can open up with just a text editor or something. Let's open up with Notepad. And you can see this text file is just defining our channels. You can see those are our camera names, and it's also defining under schema our levels that we're able to see. Right now we just have one, but if you had a few, those would be listed here. And this is where you can check to make sure that the right levels are showing up, whether you're in maps mode or whether you're in scene selection mode. It'll also show you any exposed parameters associated with that scene. Alright, so that's the basics of getting RenderStream set up inside Unreal and how to get your project ready for RenderStream with Disguise R18. It's super simple. There's only a couple things to do now, no blueprints to fuck around with. Really nice. Let's move on to the Disguise side and take a look at how to set up a very simple setup of a RenderStream layer inside Disguise. Now, just a disclaimer, this is not a comprehensive setup. We're not going to deal with tracking or anything like that. This is only covering the RenderStream layer so that you can see how things kind of translate between the two programs, maybe help you understand, or set up something simple just to test and see if your front plate and back plate are working correctly. For more details on how this all works, visit Disguise.1 and check out some of their videos. If you'd like to hear more about more of the process, please let me know down in the comments. Alright, let's jump over to Disguise and check it out, how to set this up. Alright, so we are in Disguise Designer. I've just got a simple setup here, a couple of LED surfaces in sort of a corner cube formation, and a camera. Sweet. First thing we need to do under our stage is set up an MR set. It's a mixed reality set, and what that's going to do is give us a surface to create a spatial map for. And yeah, that's really the magic sort of tracked projection mapping that we need to use. So we're going to create a new MR set, and we're going to call this backplate RenderStream. And under the settings, we need to add all of our LED screens. So we're just going to add all of those. Awesome. Under our controller, we just need to create a new indirection controller. Just call this controller. And I'm just going to do manual. And then just choose our camera. Awesome. And I'm just going to put the camera override there too, just to be sure. All right. So that's our MR set. And this is where you do your calibrations, but we're not interested in that right now because I don't actually have an LED set in front of me. Cool. So now we have our MR set. We're going to create a new layer, and we'll call this Unreal RenderStream. And we're going to create a RenderStream layer. Great. First, we need to choose an asset. And you can see our test project is already in here. And that's because it's in that RenderStream folder, RenderStream projects folder created by Disguise. So this will list any projects that are in there. We're going to click our test project. Now that I've got our asset selected, we need to create our cluster pool. So we'll do that. New cluster. I'm just going to call this cluster 1. And this is where you can add machines. Most of the time, you're going to be using potentially multiple Disguise machines to render this. I'm just going to put in my desktop machine. But the cool thing about cluster rendering is that you can assign any number of machines to render any specific stream or screen. You can kind of split up the rendering load in a lot of different ways. It's basically how NDisplay works. So very cool. But right now I'm just on my home PC, so I'm just going to pop that in there. And then in our cluster assigner, we'll just do cluster 1 assigner. Choose our asset again and click create channels. That's going to bring in our channels, and this is where we can make some decisions about how this is all split up and sort of our quality and our alpha settings for the stream. And I'm going to make some cluster assigners. I'm going to say backplate. And I'm going to make one for front plate too. Obviously we want that to be backplate. We want that to be front plate. And then in there, I'm just going to make them both full frame. Just going to pin that. Cool. So I'm going to make our backplate full frame, compressed or uncompressed, 8-bit, 10-bit, whatever. No alpha for the backplate, but I am going to check on alpha for the front plate. Cool. Next, we want to set up our mapping. So we have a multi-channel map. We have our project. We create some channels. And this is where we want to add in our mapping. And you can see under our spatial maps, we can put our MR set spatial map in there. We can do a back plate and a front plate. And if you look at them, it's just the MR set and set with camera plate, back plate, or front plate. So boom, super easy. There we go. Now we have both of our mappings running off of one layer. You don't have to do this. You can separate the layers to send to two different clusters to render any combination of these channels. But for now, I'm just doing it all on one machine. I'm going to do both of them. All right. And then under properties, you can see the scene. This is where we select our level. We only have one available, but if there were multiple, you could choose it here. This is also where exposed parameters will show up. Cool. So how do we run this thing? There's this new piece called Workloads. And if we right click on that, we have our cluster workload, untwirl all of this. And there's a few functions. Sync. That will sync the project across all of the nodes that you have. We don't have any. We just are using our one PC right now. But if we had a bunch of Disguise machines, we could click sync and it would sync this over the network. So the same version of the project is on all machines. And then we can click start. This will open up a game instance of Unreal with all the outputs for that cluster and start it up. That's pretty much it. We can also stop it here. Cool. So I'm going to hit start and see what we get. I'm also going to pin open the camera while that's starting, because sometimes that helps to have a camera active. Alright, so you can see that it's starting. It's compiling a bunch of shaders. This can happen the first time you open a project. Alright, so now that our shaders have stopped compiling, you can see that it says running. It says that our engine health is good and our receive health is good. That means that our frame rate is good enough, which is actually kind of surprising, seeing as I'm doing this all on one PC, but that's a good way to check that out. You can see now it's dropping frames now that I'm clicking around. Cool. And you could see that on our LED we have our content. He's sitting on the floor. And yeah, it kind of, the tracking, obviously we didn't calibrate anything, and yeah, so tracking's kind of whack. It also looks like most of our objects are only in the back plate. You can see one in the front plate. And you can also see that this is very wrong. Very, very wrong. And that is an alpha issue due to atmospheric fog. Atmospheric fog is going to cause you some issues in the front plate. It doesn't go away. It shows this kind of like bright alpha layer over top, which is not ideal. So we're going to go back in and double check a couple things. We're going to double check our visibility tags, and we're going to fix this. There's a couple ways we can fix it. All right, so let's stop. And you can see that it stops. You can see down here, it also has a status. Cool, and we're going to exit. All right, yeah, so you can see I did this backwards. So let's double check those. To fix that fog issue, we're just going to go here, go to our RenderStream channel definition, untwirl these show flags, and just uncheck atmosphere. Boom. Now when we go back to Disguise, our alpha issue for the front plate due to the atmospheric fog should be fixed. And bada bing! You can see we have our backplate rendering in the LED. We have our talent appearing through the camera feed, and we have our foreground objects. If we move our camera, you can see everything is tracking along, and our foreground objects are going in front of our talent. Super cool. All right, so that is how you set up a basic XR scene using Disguise R18 and Unreal Engine. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, and come back later for more videos. Thanks for watching. Peace.